We have begun to stream. Welcome to the Canadian Commie. If you are just listening in the podcast-o-verse, I am live streaming on YouTube, 6 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are the people I'm talking to when I'm talking to the comments. If you would like to join in, just go to thecanadiancommie.com. It'll take you right to the YouTube channel. You can jump on into the live stream, join the conversation, join in what's going on out in the world. Hope you guys are having a beautiful time. I'm not going to lie to you. I have got, it has to be a heat sickness. That's what it has to be. It just has to be like a heat sickness that I'm experiencing, just like an overwhelming amount of heat, and I'm not drinking enough water, and I'm exerting myself too much, and I'm trying to do too much effort, too much, and not resting enough. Woke CIA drone pilot, you have steadily become one of the regulars over on Twitch. Good to see you. The Canadian Commie Rising, an absolute pleasure, my man, an absolute pleasure. Peanut Butter Beatrice, good evening to you as well. Yeah, stay hydrated out there. Stay hydrated out there. It's Eggs D, always a pleasure. Good to see you guys. So, today's news, the news, and it's happening right now, right? It's unfolding as we're speaking. God, this last week was just like a whole thing, right? Like right now we've got Netanyahu currently at the Congress, standing up in front of everybody, basically acting like the cock of the walk, while the ICJ has outright said, hey, get out of there. These settlements are illegal. What you're doing is a crime. They are like one step away from just saying, we should arrest this guy. Meanwhile, he's standing up in front of the nation, giving speeches, being invited to the Congress in order to speak to the elected officials of America as though he is not an international war criminal. Eggs D writes, 4-minute standing ovation. Seems familiar. Seems to me like every single time there's a war criminal, the Americans stand up and cheer for it. Content writes, oh, you're alive. I know. Don't sound so impressed, Content. Yeah, I need to get an air conditioner. I think there's just no two ways about it. I think that I've actually got to bite the bullet and actually spend the money and actually get it together. Actually get an air conditioner, because this heat, I don't think I'm gonna be able to function, honestly, moving forward as climate change heats up, as things get more ridiculous. And I know that puts us in a deadly cycle, but no one else seems to give a fuck, right? Like, I can only stand on my principles for so long before I'm like, maybe I want to live. Maybe I don't want to die. Joe Anthony writes, hey, John, disgusting, this Netanyahu. Yeah, no kidding. Like, it's absolutely despicable what we're seeing. But, it's nothing new, right? Monsieur, good to see you over on Twitch. The Senate was like a Nuremberg rally, yeah. And here I'm showing a picture, for those of you who are just listening, of a protest movement. Jews say stop arming Israel. About 400 people were sitting in the entranceway wearing red. They're doing a sit-in in protest to Netanyahu being there. I think this is the bare bones minimum of what people should do. Peanut Butter Beatrice writes, how's Milo dealing with the heat? The little guy basically eats his little peanut butter treat, comes and snuggles up next to me for a minute, and then goes and stands in front of the fan. I got a big fan blowing right now, and it helps to keep things a little bit cooler, a little bit nicer, a little bit livable. Yeah, the thing that I did that really killed me is I've been going to the gym and I've been focusing on just doing one set to failure, and that's been manageable, that's been good. But I went to the gym and I did 2 sets, I did one set and then one set at 30% reduced weight, or 20 to 30% reduced weight. And I think that was a big mistake. I think that I really overestimated my ability to recover from that. And I think that really set off a chain of events and really set myself up for failure in the larger sense. Like, gotta know what your limits are, right? I'm 41, I'm just starting to get serious about this. And so I think that I've got to stay focused on just building my strength and recovery. Recovery. That's what it's really all about. Joe Anthony writes, it isn't new, it's getting more blatant, yet more shameless. Yeah, like, really think about, like, how shamelessly the Nazis were, right? This is what we're looking at. We're looking at, like, the Nazis rising, and that's both the Democrats and the Republicans. The Republicans are just more boorish, right? Like, that seems to be the big complaint that everybody has, that the Republicans are more crass and more in your face. Donald Trump, he says, like, grab him by the pussy and, like, all this kind of, like, locker talk. And I think that that's mainly, like, there are issues, specific issues that specific people are specifically take issue from, right? Not just in a matter of principle, but also in reality. But, like, the people of Gaza don't give a shit about abortion rights. The people of Gaza don't give a shit about whether or not the missiles that are being dropped on them have rainbow flags on them. Right? The people of Libya didn't care that Obama sounded like a statesman when he did it, right? Like, the entire apparatus, the Congress, the Senate, the White House, the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, what you might call the quote-unquote deep state, right? Like, all of these organizations are fascist and like, explicitly, openly, and nakedly fascist. And the only real distinguishing characteristic, outside of a couple of, honestly, like, I know that people like to blow them up to be like, oh my God, it's the most important thing of all time. No, having your house blown up, right? Like having your children shot in the streets seems to be, like, a bigger deal. And on those issues, like, should we send the CIA to Afghanistan to murder children in the streets openly and nakedly so that we can take pictures of it and publish them? The Democrats and the Republicans are in complete lockstep agreement that absolutely we should do that. There's, like, maybe one dissenting voice in the entire structure, right? And they're permitted to dissent, but then they vote for it anyway. Right? When the bill comes up, they're like, yay, right? Because they know that if they say nay, they get pushed out of the party, because the whole thing is a fascist organization. And so, like, the Republicans have already gone off the deep end. They're already willing to just stand up in front of everybody and basically be like, yeah, we're far right. We want a Christian theocracy, right? We want Christian family values. We want a far right theocracy. Like, they're not willing to stand up and be like, we should round up the Muslims and put them in detention centers. But they are doing that at the border, right? Like, they're doing that at the border. They're not talking a final solution game, so they're not like... So they could go further to the right if you really wanted them to. They could go a little bit further to the right. They could go to the concentration camps that they already have set up and start gassing people, right? So there's one more notch that they're not getting to. But, like, the Democrats are essentially right there. Right? Like, I mean, for God's sakes, when you see like a 4-minute standing ovation like this is Democrats and Republicans. This is both of them. They're both standing up. They're both doing this. Like, this guy is a mass murderer, right? He's killed at bare bones minimum 30,000 people, right? Like that's a serial killer at the highest possible level. You don't like you who else today? Who else today who is alive has more blood on their hands than this guy, than Netanyahu, right? Like, yeah, you could peg the Biden administration and people and say that they're culpable, but this guy more than anybody else is culpable for those murders. So, and here we are, the Democrats and the Republicans both simultaneously standing up and applauding for 4 minutes. Like, really think about what that looks like. Like, I challenge anybody. I really challenge anybody at this stage in the game, right? Start clapping and clap for 4 minutes straight. I have never seen that in my life. And I go to the theater, right? I go to the theater. I've seen standing ovations. I've been part of standing ovations. 4 minutes? Like, when you see a cast of like 100 people, right? I've seen a show of like 100 people were involved in the show, right? And everybody's friends and everybody's family, and there was like a second encore and like the whole thing to get all 100 people onto the stage, bow, leave the stage, come back again, bow again, leave, and then have like the central core cast come back and bow and then leave takes less than 4 minutes. And by the end of that, you're just like, okay, all right, I'm gonna sit down. I'm sitting down. I'm good, right? These guys, Netanyahu, mass murdering psychopath, genocidal maniac, right? Literally evoking God in order to justify the mass murder of a people. This guy walks into the room. Four minutes. And that's only one. That's only one. My assumption is that they gave like 30. That they gave like 30 standing ovations at one point. Contin writes, I just called you similar to Mike Benser, and I got censored. Yeah, well, Mike Benser, very controversial figure. You know what? There was Chris Hedges. As I'm talking, I'm just remembering I read this one article that was written by Chris Hedges that I would like to read on stream. And it's short, but it's, you know, hey, did you guys know Biden dropped out? Right? Biden dropped out of the race. So in the midst of all of this, Netanyahu coming in, being the mass murdering psychopath, getting a 4-minute standing ovation, Biden has dropped out of the race, and Kamala Harris seems to just be the one who has been anointed. She's just been like, doo, ba, 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 and immediately, the the conversation seems to have pivoted and seems to have changed. And really where we're at, what people are hoping, what the Democrats are hoping for, is they want to get back to that hopey-changey stuff, right? Like, we all remember Obama, back when we were more innocent and more naive, and we actually thought that electoral politics was going to be capable of resolving issues, right? Back before we here at the Canadian Commie came to fully accept that what we have experienced is a corporate coup d'etat. The Democrats and the Republicans are allies. The corporate power structure is starting to lose control of the far right-wing side of the coup, which is the Republicans, and that's evident with the appearance of Donald Trump, right? So they're losing a bit of control, but at the end of the day, the Republicans play ball, so the corporate power structure would prefer to be ruled by Democrats, because Democrats at least are better actors, right? Democrats are at least better at pretending to care, and at least a little bit better at putting on the statesmanship, right? The statesmanship that we come to expect, right? That when you compare presidents from the last 40 years, you look at Clinton, Obama, even Biden versus Bush, and certainly Trump, right? It's pretty clear, like, who the statesmen are in the conversation, right? Because what Americans really care about, and what's important, guys, let's be real. What's important is pageantry. That's what's really important. And that's what all of the, like, pro-Democrat people are functionally on about. They just care about pageantry. They don't really care about major issues at all. The minor wedge issues that they'll constantly bring up are literally the only thing they've got, right? Like, it doesn't matter that you are homeless and impoverished and in the streets. Doesn't matter that your children and your children's children are going to be facing a climate change apocalypse. None of that matters, right? What we really need to have the big, serious conversation about for the 400,000th time, over and over again, is abortion rights again, right? Yet again, over and over, which is essentially what Kamala Harris is banking on. All I've heard her say, the big meme that's going around with her, is you didn't just fall out of a coconut tree? Or what is it? Do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? She's telling a story about what her mother would say. When we were acting foolish, my mom would say, do you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? No, things happen within a context. This clip that she said about a year ago now is what's being elevated. People are doing, like, remixes of it. There's songs of it. It's all very cynical. Obviously, like, once you see how the sausage is made, you're like, yeah, they're grabbing hold of, like, this meme culture, putting forward the best possible image they can in the hopes of creating an energy, of galvanizing an energy, getting people into the hopey changey, right? Reminding them about Obama and hopey changey. And remember that hopey changey where we all got together, we all voted in Obama in, like, these overwhelming numbers. We all voted for Obama for hopey changey. And then he murdered Gaddafi, blew up Libya, gave $2.8 billion to Wall Street, didn't punish them at all for collapsing the global economy, right? Like, this is what the Democrats are going to do. And this is the gambit that they're playing. This is what they're doing. And it's so naked. It's so obvious. But it might work, is the thing. It might work, right? She's almost the minute Biden stepped down. Almost the minute. I was actually shocked at how fast it happened, right? Now, it takes a lot to actually shock me. It takes a lot to shock me. And the speed by which Democratic pundits immediately began talking about Trump's age, it was shocking to see. Literally, Biden puts in the paper. I'm stepping down. My fellow Americans, we here at the I'm gonna get some ice cream, right? As soon as he put that in, literally the very next moment, you've got, like, all of these Democratic talking heads being like, Donald Trump's quite old, you know. Donald Trump's quite old, and we got to worry about his mental faculties. All of the shit that everybody was saying about Biden, they basically just took and judo rolled into, a keto rolled right over onto Trump. And we're all sitting here, and it's this, like, as if the Biden administration didn't just happen, as if Joe Biden was not literally just the president, that we were all looking at him for 4 years, this disastrous debate performance, and they're just kind of banking on the idea that we have the memory of a goldfish, that we all just forget, right? Because it's true, like, we do have this, like, goldfish-like memory as a people. There isn't really anybody who exists in order to maintain the memory of the people, right? And that's on purpose. The news organizations as they stand now are basically just give you snapshots, daily snapshots, and nobody's job is to like be a keeper of the archive and be like, this is what happened. Like, this is what happened 100 years ago. This is what happened 50 years ago. This is what happened yesterday, right? And if you live in this perpetual state of forgetting, this perpetual state of like being like the blue fish, what is her name, Dora or Dory from Finding Nemo, you're just constantly in this state of like forgetting what just happened, then you can be convinced into doing anything, right? And so people are going to look at Kamala and suddenly be like, oh, she's completely new. She's a completely new person. It's like the Democrats are reborn, and that's how they're trying to present it. That she's got this like, they're gonna present her as like the mother. She's like gonna have like the matron kind of appeal and like dispensing wisdom like an elderly mother, like or like a cool aunt. You know, that's how they're gonna try to position her, and everybody is gonna be like, oh wow, I completely forget about the Gaza genocide. I completely forget about the Ukraine war. I completely forget about Libya. I completely forget about the Wall Street bailouts. I completely forget about the Clinton administration impoverishing children in America. Like, I completely, oh wow, all of these things, no, it's all gone. This is just new. And now we get to look at Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And this is the first, history begins today, right? One of the things I'm constantly amazed at about America and American culture is how insistent, and at this point we really, really have to say that it's an insistence. We really have to say that Americans are dedicated to it. How dedicated Americans are to basically insisting that history begins today. History begins today, now, right at this moment. And if you start bringing up history, it was so long ago. That's just within living memory. People who are still alive, who experienced those things, are still around. So long ago. Don't you know we only plan in 2-minute increments? Like the fucking Dory the fish? Just like, boop, oh, I guess I'm here. Who's this? Oh, wow, a black woman is president? Versus Donald Trump? Whoa, I've just shown up on Earth. I just fell out of the coconut tree. Like, it's so funny that Kamala Harris is the one that's saying, Did you just fall out of the coconut tree? Because the answer to that question is yes. Every single American, or certainly the body of America, fell out of the coconut tree today. History begins today, right? That was true of the Ukraine war. When Vladimir Putin invaded, right? History began that day, and not one moment earlier. How many times have I talked about that issue on here, and I've had to explain the history leading up to those events? Right? How many times have people just basically ignored me in regards to the history of these events? Same with the Gaza genocide. How often are people like, well, they left Gaza Strip in 2005. They should be grateful. Why would they leave in 2005? Because that's when history started. Like, and so I think the Democrats are really banking on this. They're just banking on the fact that most Americans seem to only really care about pageantry and just only seem to really care about the appearances. Meanwhile, the entire rest of the world is looking at this clown fiesta, right? This absolute chaos, ridiculous nonsense. Just this chaos generator, right? Like, the American electoral system is a chaos generator. That even when it's going smoothly, it's just fraught with trepidation. It's just fraught with deep concern and deep crisis. Like, think about the perspective of somebody like Vladimir Putin or someone like Xi Jinping, right? Xi Jinping has been in the party, right, in the Communist Party of China since like 1982, like 1970 something or other. I could look it up. And in that time, he has seen like presidents rise and fall. And there's like literally like one of the big conversations that happens in communism, and one of the things that we're always constantly trying to avoid in communist parties and communist organizations is factionalism, right? That when disagreements arise, the hope is that those disagreements will be resolved. We'll have a vote on it. There'll be a consensus brought, and that the people who find themselves in the minority on that vote will basically shut up about it and reintegrate back into the party and continue forward and essentially toe the party line. Even if you personally disagree with the decision of the majority, right? If somebody comes up to you and says, what's the position of the party? You don't say, oh, these idiots, they decided this, that, and the other thing. What a bunch of morons, and I think that we should go this way. No, you say, this is what the party decided. And if somebody says to you, well, what do you think about that? You could say, well, on the lead up to that, I thought this, and this was my argument, but the majority disagreed with me. And so this is what the party has decided, and so this is what we're going to uphold. Right? And that's what communist organizations try to avoid factionalism, right? The American political system is factionalism. The thing is founded on the concept of factionalism. It's designed to be factional, right? You have two major factions, the Democrats and the Republicans, and they are antagonists to one another by design. It's designed to be an antagonistic system. And then within these organizations, there are factions, right? In the liberal side, on the Democratic side, you've got the Bernie Sanders faction, right? The progressive faction with AOC and all these people, right? And on the right wing, right, you have the old neocon guard, the Mitt Romneys, the Cheneys, and then you have the Trumps, right? And Trump has kind of taken over. And so you have factions within factions, right? There's factionalism and factionalism. And so how could you possibly organize your society accurately? Nilo, good to see you. Donald writes, you probably know well that no one is saying capitalism is perfect because it is far from being so. It leads to growth, but concentrated, even though we have been lifting people out of poverty. Big question mark over that final statement, right? Like, how capitalism grows itself and how it actually builds its economies is through genocide and slavery and war. Those are the primary methods by which capitalism expands itself, right? And you can see that's the case throughout all of capitalist history. That America was built by slaves and slavery. That's how they developed their economy. It was an inefficient way to develop their industrial economy. The Soviets showed that you could do it in a single generation by just using your citizenry and mobilizing your own citizenry without embarking on a slave trade or stealing resources or any of this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, the Americans, like America was literally set up by creating a genocide of the First Nations people and enslaving the African continent. So this idea that capitalism is quote-unquote lifting people out of poverty, when? The only time that capitalism has actually, quote-unquote, lifted people out of poverty is when millions of people surrounded the White House, right? Like, the New Deal is this very new, tiny moment, right? And now, Donald, now, come on, let's be straight with one another, okay? Now I can tell you right now, nakedly and openly, you don't know what you're talking about, right? If you're saying socialism does not work because it economically fails, you don't know what you're talking about. Every single time socialism has been tried, it has seen major successes. It hasn't been successful from the position of the capitalist, and it is a threat to the capitalist system, right? That's why it needs to be attacked, assaulted, and dismantled systematically by capitalists, and that's what actually happens, right? That's what actually happens. So socialist projects don't economically fail. Like, how could they? It's just sort of nonsense to say out loud. The workers put in all of the work, all of the effort, and then reap the rewards from their own work. Well, there's no parasites on the side of that. There's no boils on the side of that. And that's what capitalists are, is that they're parasites and boils on the side of functioning systems. And they're afraid. They're afraid of those systems taking over, because socialist systems push capitalists out on purpose. I'll continue your comment, though. When we think about a society where interests will be put, this strengthens the whole economy, which creates a job. Socialism, a productive failure. I mean, objectively false. Just objectively false. In a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of way, my man. And Donald continues, because in order for socialism to work, you need to allocate resources, which it can't do well, except every single time it does. And due to its pricing system that just ignores the availability of products, we have no idea what you're talking about. Just make it sweep out of shelves. I'm not sure what you're talking about, because I don't think you know what you're talking about. Donald says, like anybody serious knows what I'm talking about. Okay, just kind of a self-report, I guess. This is economic ugliness, and then because it doesn't do well in the production, it relies on food ration from the government to the population. Like, again, I really don't know what you're talking about. Like, the during World War II, the Americans used rations. Like, during periods of crisis, when societies reach crisis points, everybody becomes a communist, right? Because communism works. That's why America became communist during World War II, and they did a whole bunch of communist and socialist projects, which the capitalists immediately had to dismantle because they were too effective. They worked too well, and it was impossible to parasiticize the system, right? That's what capitalists are actually doing. That's what capitalists actually are. Like, that's what they're actually doing. They take fully functioning systems that are completely fine, working absolutely fine, efficient, streamlined, everything's wonderful, and then the capitalist comes along and says, how do I extract wealth from that? And that's the only measurement of success in capitalism, right? If one capitalist can make $1 by collapsing the healthcare system, that's considered a massive, enormous success in the capitalist mindset. Right? That it's about extracting wealth. It's about wealth extraction. Who cares about the millions of people you impoverish? Who cares about the devastation? Right? Oh my God. Now we're getting into this. Okay, let me tell you something. If we have 5 apples to feed 10 people, each apple should cost $2. Because you set it at 1, it will run out. That makes you have no idea of control. So you've just created a fantasy, like a fiction, to justify your own point, and it doesn't actually make sense because you're not really articulating it very well, right? Like, if you have 5 apples to feed 10 people, each apple should cost $2. First of all, false. Even according to capitalist theory, that's false, right? When you get scarce resources, right? Resources are not distributed equally in the capitalist model. So maybe the first apple is $2, the second apple would be $2.50, the next apple would be $3, because the most valuable commodity is the last commodity, right? The last commodity is the most valuable. And you can set that if you have the very last of something, right? And and there's a demand for it, right? If there's people asking for the very last thing that you have, you can basically set the price as high as you want. And capitalists do. Especially when it comes to starving people, right? Like, you saw this happen during the pandemic. Remember people hoarding toilet paper? Remember how the FBI and the police departments had to step in and seize control of those resources that people were hoarding. Do you remember this? I do, right? Because that's the capitalist mindset. Hoard as many resources as possible and then sell scarce resources at inflated prices. You can see that in Texas. Every single time the power grid goes down, electricity prices triple, right? Donald says, you can't be the good guy to set the apple for 0.5 because you don't care about markets. This is what happens in socialist countries. Literally, they do not care about markets. I just find it weird that you're telling me about socialism when you clearly don't know anything about it. Like, Donald, my advice to you, really, and I really genuinely mean this, okay? Because you're going to have a better time. You're going to learn more. You're going to be more effective. You're gonna be more intelligent if you just admit to yourself, and you should do it like in this moment, right now. You should just do it in this moment. Just be honest with yourself, be serious with yourself, really look in your heart and in your soul and in your mind right now. Really listen to what I'm saying. Right? Don't just get into this scoffing debate bro mindset. Right? Just this like like you're Beavis and Butthead. Right? If you want to get past Beavis and Butthead, if you want to actually learn something, if you want to actually know something about the subject, then the best thing for you to do right now is to just acknowledge that you are illiterate. Right? And there is nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging to yourself, I don't know anything about the subject. That's actually a mark of strength. That's actually a mark of intelligence. It's actually a mark of maturity to be able to stand up and actually say, okay, you know what? I don't actually know anything about this subject. Everything that I have been told about this subject has come from fraudulent liars who have done nothing but lie to me, who they themselves are actually functionally illiterate, that they have been leading the world into crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis after crisis, right? And so then to listen to the people who are liars, obvious fraudulent liars, who have been enacting just overt total disasters, right? Total disasters. To say that these are the people that we should listen to and take seriously as they completely crater their own economy, as they face a significant decline economically, I just don't understand why you want to back this. And what's so odd is, like, very nakedly you've shown me and the chat that you don't actually know what you're talking about, and yet you're acting like you do, even though, like, you're essentially saying 1 + 1 = banana. Like, so my advice to you is just acknowledge it. Just say to yourself. You don't need to say it to us. You don't need to say it to chat. Right? Just acknowledge that you don't know what you're talking about. And you're going to do a lot better. You're going to do a lot better. Unknown Force 69, nice, says over on Twitch, forget Kamala, we want Bernie. Nah. Communism doesn't work because of corruption. Yeah, corruption has been an issue, but corruption is an issue of all ruling classes and all ruling parties. Communist systems have really worked to figure this one out. I think this is the big difference, right? The big difference between communist systems and capitalist systems is that communist systems are constantly trying to solve the problem. Right? They're constantly looking at the problem and they're thinking to themselves, how do we solve this problem? How do we confront this problem? What do we do about this problem? Let's try this. Let's try this. With the end goal of being solving that problem. Right? capitalist systems are not trying to solve the problem. Because the problem that the capitalist system is trying to solve is, how do we make more money for capitalists? That's the only problem that capitalists and capitalist systems are even attempting to solve at all. They're not attempting to produce any other solution for any other thing. And so, quote-unquote, corruption in a capitalist system is, like, to be corrupt in capitalism means you're not trying to enrich capitalists. If you're trying to help the working class, if you're trying to lift people out of poverty, if you're trying to erect institutions, in terms of how the capitalists think about capitalist systems, that's corruption. Whereas if you're in a communist system, you're trying to root corruption out, and corruption in a communist system is capitalism. So to follow up into your next question, what would you do to stomp corruption out of communism? I mean, the most successful person who has done it very recently is Xi Jinping. That Xi Jinping, when he took office, launched an anti-corruption campaign. The capitalist world doesn't take it seriously. They don't believe that this was a serious thing that Xi Jinping actually did. But when you actually look at it, it was actually very serious. And it was very... and the Chinese populace is more or less pleased with how it actually worked out. And what it comes down to is creating institutional structures in order to vet and train governors. That's what the National People's Congress is. That the National People's Congress is a system of vetting and training that systemically puts the people who are elected into it into positions in order to vet them on purpose. Does this mean the National People's Congress is uncorruptible? Of course not. But so far it has been the most resilient institution that we've seen to date. I'm going to go use the washroom, guys, quickly. Donald, please stop trying to educate people. Like, it really is kind of embarrassing to watch you. Okay, I'll be right back. Ooh. He's a good boy. Alright, I'm back. Okay, so Donald, I'm just going to lay it on you, okay? Stop making declarative statements. Start asking questions. Okay? I'm just going to ban you. Because you're just filling my chat with garbage. Right? Start asking questions. Stop making declarative statements. Because you're obviously illiterate. Like, it's really, really naked. Like, in a very, very, like, straightforward, obvious way. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's just, like, an obvious, like, knot that you're obviously not willing to allow anybody to pull. And that you're just dead it's like I'm talking to somebody who thinks Jesus Christ is coming back at any moment. Just like a religious fanatic fundamentalist. And so, I don't take anything you say seriously. I don't think anybody in the chat takes anything you say seriously. I don't think anybody around you takes anything seriously. Oh, we have a Nazi over on Twitch, so we're just going to ban the Nazi quickly. No Nazis, please. Rule 1. Donald writes, okay, I can start asking questions. Oh, good. That's how you learn. But once again, you're just criticizing capitalism, which we all do, even social democrats. But your suggestion is socialism. So again, I'm a communist. My suggestion is not socialism. My suggestion is communism. But economically, it doesn't work, right? No, obviously it does. Right? Like, it obviously does. Like, literally every single time socialism and communism has been enacted, it has been a dramatic improvement and has improved the lives of millions of people. Literally every single time. No exceptions, by the way. Like, has it become a permanent fixture in every single society that has done it? No, and there's reasons for that. But to pretend as though socialism and communism it doesn't work is just to tacitly admit illiteracy. The book that I would recommend, if you would like to read about that very subject, by the way, is Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds. I think Michael Parenti's Black Shirts and Reds does a really good job of breaking down how there's this myth that exists in the American consciousness that says socialism doesn't work, even though it obviously does. It's like obviously successful. Like that's the part about it that's so ridiculous, right? About the claim that socialism doesn't work, is that it obviously works. Like obviously. Like if I lit a lighter and then held that up to a bunch of paper, you would expect the paper to burn, right? And that would be obvious. Well, so too is it with socialism. Every single time socialism is enacted, it works. It's a superior model. It's a better system. It functions much better. And the reason why social systems and socialism starts to degrade is because capitalists degrade it on purpose. That they don't want these systems to operate. I, in fact, have articles today that are about how Canada's healthcare system. Dr. John Carnes, member of the Order of Canada, says Canada's healthcare system is underfunded and ill-designed. Right? So the capitalists are purposefully... What capitalists do is that they get their capitalist buddies into positions of power, and then they purposefully defund and purposefully make systems untenable on purpose. And then they say, see, socialism doesn't work after we defund it and destroy it. Better privatize it. Right? So they're actively making the conditions true on purpose. So I just don't know where you're getting your claims from. It's just sort of an odd position to hold. It's backed in nothing. To me, it looks like religious fanaticism. Clunker John, good to see you. Long Defiant, good to see you. Cuba has a higher life expectancy than the United States. China has a higher life expectancy than the United States. You can't tell me that capitalism is successful. I mean, Cuba has more doctors than Canada. Not more doctors per capita, but more doctors. Period. That should be considered an international embarrassment, by the way. We should be embarrassed as Canadians that that's the case. That there's no world in which it makes sense that Cuba has more doctors than we do. But they do. And why? Because they have a socialist system that wants to do that. And so they do it. And they're very proud of it, and they should be proud of it. Feed3 over on Twitch writes, you support Ukraine? I mean, that's a very... Like, there's no plus... Like, I can't say yes, no, right? Like, the people of Ukraine find themselves caught in a great power struggle. And I wish it weren't so. But they are caught in a great power struggle. My recommendation to the people of Ukraine and to Ukraine generally, including Zelensky, including all these guys, is they got to cut their losses and they got to surrender. They can't win the war. The Americans are basically just bleeding them dry. They're using Ukraine as a pawn against Russia. They've put Russia in a position where Russia feels like it must fight, and so it is fighting. The Zelensky administration has really turned into a total disaster. I'm a bit sympathetic of Zelensky because I think that he's dealing with a lot of far-right Nazis in Ukraine. And, there are people in Parliament, there are far-right people in Parliament that have said that if Ukraine surrenders, we're going to assassinate Zelensky, right? Like, this is a serious situation, a serious thing that's going on in Ukraine. But the driving force behind it, the force that's propelling the war forward constantly and inevitably, is the United States. Because the goal of the United States is to try to weaken Russia. That's their goal. They don't want Russia to be a peer competitor. They don't want Russia to be able to stand up economically on its own feet. They don't want Russia to feel a moment's peace or to feel safe. And so they're forcing Russia to spend a lot of money on military expenditure and to focus a lot of energy and a whole populace. They're forcing Russia to militarize in a way that Russia hasn't militarized in a while. I mean, I think it's foolish. I think the United States is making a huge error, a massive, massive mistake that is blowing up in their face in big, big, significant ways. So, I mean, the best thing that could have happened is that when Putin started to put troops on the border, everybody just backed down and de-escalated, right? That would have been the best thing. That's what the Russians wanted. They didn't want to go in there. They didn't want to fight that war. They don't want to be fighting that war. They feel they have to. They evoke what they call the Great Patriotic War, World War II, right? The people of Russia feel duty bound to be engaged in this conflict, and I think the Ukrainians are just kind of trapped in it, and I don't think there's an escape hatch for them. So. Long Defiant continues, tens of thousands of people die of malaria in Haiti every year. You can't tell me the capitalism knows how to allocate resources. Millions of people die every year from waterborne disease. You can't tell me the capitalism knows how to allocate resources. Is there a massive war and disorder and the biggest business is death? You can't tell me that capitalism knows how to allocate resources. Yeah, it's sort of funny to defend capitalism while the capitalists have like this enormous war budget and no healthcare. Like that's the oddest thing, I think. Literally America is spending like $1 trillion a year, more than the next like 10 countries combined, on its military, and the people of America are steadily becoming impoverished. And they're not seeing the fruits of their labor. The housing market is going out of control. People can't rent anymore. The life that their parents lived, the life that the boomers lived, is gone. Right? If you're a millennial, and certainly if you're a Gen Z or a Gen Alpha, like that's gone for you. Like I know kids who are 25, right? 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. And they're like literally living in an apartment with 4 other people. I know one person who straight up lives in a room that is divided by curtains, and she sleeps in one segment of the sectioned off room. And she pays as much in rent as I do for my apartment. I'm just lucky because I've been here for a while, right? Like, meanwhile, the boomer generation, by 25, you had a house. You had a house, a wife, 3 kids, 2 cars. Take vacations. Like this idea that, the younger generation, they don't want to work, they're just not bootstrapping themselves. It's garbage. It's just garbage. It's a dim-witted way to think at this stage in the game. We have a person named Yo Markey, just says MAGA. What about it, my man? Did you want to make a bigger statement? Also, like, when was America great? What were the conditions by which you would define America's greatness? Joe Anthony writes, Donald, did it ever occur to you that capitalists hate socialism because it does work? They sure don't mind socialistic policy when they need a bailout. Yeah, exactly. When it comes time to bail out the rich, right? Then socialism for the rich, absolutely. Which, I mean, that's basically fascism. Yeah. The majority of the world has been owned and ran by capitalist sociopaths for the better part of a century. Singing its praises in 2024 is a delusion. Yeah, but history starts today, Joe. Right? There's no such thing as history. We don't need to know anything. Right? Like, we can just basically say that capitalism is basic economics, the way that this guy does. Yeah, I think so. I just don't think... Well, he wasn't very serious in the first place. Right? Like, he wanted to come in here as a religious acolyte of capital and bully us into confessing that capitalism is a superior model. And he thinks so because I think his dad told him, basically. That's all. Like, when you're talking to people who are defending the system of capital, you're talking to religious acolytes. That's really the hard truth. You're talking to people who don't know what they're talking about, who refuse to know what they're talking about, who haven't actually read anything, who don't actually know anything. They just hold the beliefs that they hold in the same way that a kid holds on to the belief that Santa is real, and into the same way that some, an 80-year-old Christian evangelical believes that Jesus Christ for sure is coming back at any moment. That for sure is happening. So, I'm sympathetic to a degree, but like, you can always tell who the religious fundamentalists are in the conversation because they're not asking questions. They're making declarative statements that are nonsense. That's really what it is. That when you're standing there making a declarative statement about a subject you don't know anything about, and it's really obvious to people who do know something about the subject, it's because you're a religious fundamentalist. And capitalists have worked really hard to ensure that nobody acknowledges that they're religious fanatics. I think one of my big successes as I've been doing this channel, and I feel like I should write this down and like write a book about it, is acknowledging and discussing and taking more seriously the idea of capitalism not as an economic system, but as a religious system. Because it is a religious system of thought primarily now. That there is an economy, there is like a economic quality to it, right? But that economic quality has been articulated by Marxists. Like, if you wanted to be honest about how the system of capital actually works from an economic perspective, well, then you're reading Marx and you're talking about Marx, right? And that's how that actually looks. But if you're trying to defend the system of capital, the only way to defend the system of capital at this point is just by being a religious fanatic. And that's why most of them are, right? The Jordan Petersons and the Shapiros and the Crowders and all these guys, they're just religious fanatics, right? You just need to... the big reason why they don't want you to talk about settler colonialism. The big reason why they're constantly saying, oh, slavery was so long ago, oh my God, right? The big reason why they're doing that is because the moment you know what the history is, you can see very plainly, oh, you guys are just fucking nuts. Like, you guys are obviously out of your minds. And it's that settler colonial mindset. Like, they always knew that it was dangerous, right? And it was the settler colonial mindset and understanding the history of settler colonialism that really showed people, that really broke through, I think, to people, what was going on in Gaza. Once people saw the basic history, just the basic history of the Israeli settler colonial project. It's just naked what it is now, right? There's no mystery to it. The whole narrative of both sides, complicated issue. Oh my God, it's so difficult. There's so many different factors. The purposeful obfuscation, the intentional confusing of the issue, the pretending that, like, just like the climate change deniers pretended like it was a both sides issue for a decade, right? Well, they've done the same thing with Gaza, and they've done the same thing with Palestine. When the issue is actually very straightforward, that the Zionists are settler colonialists who went into Palestine in order to ethnically cleanse it. And how do we know? Because they said so. Very nakedly. Like, very nakedly. And and we're watching them do it. And every single time they do another purge, they nakedly, openly say so. To the point now where the ICJ is straight up, like, we've straight up got the ICJ. Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories is illegal, a form of apartheid, and must end, says the UN's High Court at The Hague. Like, I don't know what people need to see anymore. Like, I don't know what reality people are living in. But, and I think this mindset is the mindset of the capitalist, right? They have to just ignore the basic history. They have to clutch onto religious texts. They have to believe in their religious ideology. The concept that capitalism is a meritocracy or something, just this absolute garbage brain way of thinking. It's obviously false. It's obviously not a meritocracy, like, very plainly. But people are not willing to cut through this because the billionaire class wants you to believe in the religious ideology of capitalism because they've benefited very well by the system of capital, right? They've exploited the populace, they've extracted all this wealth, and they don't want you to actually say that that's the case. They don't want you to believe that they're a dark-hearted psychopath in spite of all of the evidence. They don't want you to actually understand that they're just ruthlessly exploiting everybody around them for their own personal gain. Right? They want you to believe that, no, I'm here because of my own intelligence. I'm so super smart, and you're just jealous. It's just absolute garbage brain take. Peanut Butter Beatrice writes, according to the John Birch Society, America hit its peak around 1918 or something. Yeah, basically before women had the vote and before civil rights. Yeah, exactly. Everything was so much better when women just did what they were told and we had slaves. Certainly was a more efficient economy, I'll tell you what. Not having to pay workers. That's efficiency right there. Right? Isaac writes, good to see you, by the way, Isaac. The Dems think they're going to get the black vote by putting a person who is not black and a descendant of slave owners. Kamala Harris, her mother is Jamaican. I don't really care to wade into the weeds of who is or is not black. I think that I'm not really in that position, frankly. It's not my conversation to have, right? And I'm honest about that. That when it comes to identity politic issues, or black rights issues or civil rights issues, right? I'll leave it to the people who have the authority to speak on those matters, and I'll listen to what they have to say. I'll take what they have to say seriously. I'll believe it when they talk. And if those people are saying Kamala Harris is black, then as far as I'm concerned, that's fine by me. Yeah. Well, I think Long Defiant continues and says, isn't it funny how we use terms like white and black but refuse to define them? They are meaningless terms, just symbols for aspirations and dreams. Well, I think this is a point that the quote-unquote black community has been pointing out for a long time. There's no such thing as a white person, right? That whiteness was created as an artifact of slavery. And it was created, like, before slavery took hold in North America, and the line between white and black was created, all of the white people hated one another, right? There was fights between the Irish and the Scottish and the English and the French, right? Everybody was at each other all the time. This distinguishing, this idea of a white person, right? This idea of a white person. And it's the reason why people of color say that you can't be racist against a white person, because whiteness as a concept doesn't really exist. Like, and the more I dwell on that, the more I think on that, the more I contemplate that idea, the more I see how true that is. That these really are just like color gradients that exist because some people live closer to the north than the equator. And the closer to the equator you live, the darker your skin color. And the further away from the equator you go, the lighter your skin color. Because you just have more or less melatonin in your skin. And that's it. And so to build this entire ideology and this entire philosophy of belief on this idea of that person has this skin color, that person has this identity or whatever, to me is just outrageous. It's just outrageous. And I respect and understand that in this conversation I exist in a position of privilege. I'm in the my background and my history is settler colonialism. That my ancestors weren't pulling the guns, but we were settling the land, right? We were settling and we were colonizing. That's what we did, literally. That's my family history. That's my father's history. You don't have to go back generations and generations. Oh, so long ago. Oh my God, forever ago. John, settler colonial. Literally, my dad, my father, was a settler colonialist. That they moved into territory and settled on it. Where did they get that territory from? And so that's my background and that's my history, and that gives me a position of privilege. And I have had privileges in my life, but once I have woken up to that, once I became aware of it and took seriously the criticisms that were coming from the First Nations people, and took seriously the criticisms that were coming from the black population, and took seriously what that meant for my own story and my own narrative and my own history, I knew that I couldn't maintain this ridiculous notion that, oh God, it's so long ago, bygones be bygones, history, why are we bringing it up, etc., etc., etc. Because some of us live in mansions and some of us live in the streets. That's why. Like, for God's sakes, in Manitoba, the province that I grew up in, there was what's called the 60s scoop. This is where the RCMP and the Catholic Church literally kicked in the doors of First Nations people and stole their children. Literally ripped babies out of the arms of mothers in order to bring them into residential schools. The fact of that, the reality of that happened, makes the conversation that we're currently having about this issue childish and absurd. There's this big conversation in Canada about, well, are there bodies? We found what we suspect are bodies. They didn't find any bones. Oh my God, they didn't find this, that. Okay, that doesn't mean anything. The RCMP and the Catholic Church kidnapped children, First Nations children, from their parents, brought them to residential schools, shaved their heads, gave them English names, taught them English, refused to allow them to speak their language. We literally have people voting in the parliament to kill the Indian. Like, the people who are trying to act as revisionists and apologists on this issue can go fuck themselves. That happened in the 60s. So at the same time that the Beatles are touring America, same time as Elvis Presley is in his sort of final years, the same time. Got a hunka burning love, yeah. So you say you want a revolution, baby, you know. RCMP officers are kicking in the doors of First Nations people in Manitoba, kidnapping children, and bringing them to boarding schools, separated from their families. And that doesn't end. The Catholic Church's inclusion in that doesn't end until 1996, the year The Lion King was in theaters. That's when the privatization of the residential school system ended, and it became a public institution. Because it never actually ended. It just became part of the government. And they just had the church stop involving itself in it. And that, the Indian Act, the 60s scoop, is an artifact of settler colonialism. And if you don't understand settler colonialism and the settler colonial mindset, and if you don't understand how the Europeans came in and how they acted and what they did, and if you try to lionize it and pretend as though it's it's ancient history, if you try to make myths of it and create this founders myth of the greatness of the founders and all this nonsense, well, then you're going to come to really strange conclusions. Like, so often I see right-wingers talking about these issues, and it really is like they're watching somebody who is on fire, literally on fire in front of them, and they turn to one another and go, well, that gentleman is acting hysterically. There must be something wrong with him. It must be a weakness of his bloodline. There must be something wrong with him inherently. He's an inferior race after all. When literally the guy is on fire in front of you. And none of them look at each other and think to ask, maybe, or even think to say, maybe he's acting the way that he's acting because he's on fire. Right? Maybe understanding the basic history. Hey, how did you get to be on fire? What were the circumstances by which you were on fire? And let's say a couple of them hop up and go, oh my God, we got to put the fire out. Oh my God, that's a fire. That man's on fire. No wonder he's acting so strangely. Let's put the fire out. Oh my God. And then you put the fire out. Well, now a huge amount of them, most of them, if not all of them, are saying, okay, well, good, the fire's out. Well, on with our lives, buck up, stand up straight with your shoulders back, bootstrap yourself, get on your feet. We don't need to ask who put you on fire. We don't need to ask what happened. We don't need to give you recompense for the fact that you're now scarred and burnt. We don't need to deal with any of that. Right? Ancient history, forget it just happened. Whatever. There's no more crisis. We put the fire out. That was the only thing that was a threat to us, the white people. And it's from this history that this concept of whiteness springs forth. Because a Polish person, a German, an Irishman, a Scot, an Englishman, they all could look at one another and say, okay, well, we're above that, right? We might not like one another, and we had wars and fought, and we've got our own internal stuff, but we create an internal alliance of whiteness. And First Nations people and black people and Hispanic people are outside of that alliance. And it's obviously the white population that's maintaining it. And they're maintaining it because it's materially beneficial for them to do so. And that's naked, I think. Just naked as naked can get. And the strangest thing that's happening in the discourse now is that we have this group of MAGA communists showing up and trying to assert a position that basically says, yeah, John, you know that history that you just talked about? Let's just ignore it. Let's just ignore it and focus exclusively on issues that matter to straight white men. And that'll be communism, right? That'll be a serious thing. That'll be taken seriously. We'll definitely have the right to govern and the right to rule, for sure. Long Defiant writes, I know people who are Italian who don't consider themselves white. Well, I mean, I think nobody should consider themselves white. Honestly, even the idea that we consider ourselves along nationalist lines is a bit dodgy, right? Like, I mean, it makes sense because it's like where you are literally from, right? This parcel of land that historically we've drawn this invisible line around, and we wrote this name on a map, and it has this history, right? So I came from that, so I'm a Canadian, right? I'm from Manitoba, so I'm a Manitoban, right? And it has, and so there's a certain set of experiences. Like, when I talk to another Manitoban, we don't need to expound broadly on the prairies and the flatlands, right? We know, right? We're from there. But people get really married to it. And one of the things that I found, I just had like this dawning realization. I just mentioned the MAGA communists, right? These guys called themselves from the outset patriotic socialists. And the line between patriotism and nationalism is razor thin. And these guys are literally walking around calling themselves patriotic socialists when National Socialism was Nazism. Like, what distinguishes a patriot from a nationalist is just literally, a patriot says, I love my country is great, I'll fight and I'll die for my country, I will defend my country, I love my country, I'm going to stand up for my country, and I'm going to help build my country and do everything we can for my country. That's a patriot. And then a nationalist says, I agree with all of that, which is why I want my neighbor to be like us. That's a nationalist, right? Or a nationalist will create a exclusionary position of segments of the society, right? So if you have a section of your society that doesn't fit in with what you think your nation should be, the classic one is a white man saying of a black man, you're not American, right? And it's a nationalist position. But these guys are walking around calling themselves patriotic socialists when the National Socialists were straight up Nazis. And their position is literally, let's ignore all of these DEI issues and focus exclusively on class issues, and we'll deal with all the DEI stuff after the revolution. Sure, bud. I buy that. Yep, it still hasn't ended. Trade schools have taken the place of residential schools. Long Defiant says, OMG, that meme. For those of you who are just listening at home, it's that scene from Silence of the Lambs where the fellow is looking down the hole at the woman he's captured. holding his little dog, and he says, "It votes for the Democrats or it gets the Republicans again." And the woman says, "Please, mister, I just want health care." I think that's pretty accurate. Pretty accurate. Long Defiant writes, "A patriot can dissent. A nationalist never does." Eggs D writes, "I can't stop considering my nationality or ethnicity so long as there are plenty of other people who want to hurt me along those lines." Yes, Eggs D, you're bringing up something this is what privilege is. And this is what I have to say about these mega communists fundamentally, is that they're privileged. They have the privilege to be able to say, let's just ignore these issues. Well, Chinese people, First Nations people, black people, women, they don't have that privilege. They literally can't say that. Literally. Which is what makes these guys extra unserious. Because their whole position is just absurd on the face of it. Just stop considering yourself a woman. Stop considering yourself a Chinese person. Right? Just ignore the fact that there are people who are going to come after you or insult you or belittle you. Just ignore those people. They don't exist, right? And they don't exist to us because we never experience that. We don't experience that kind of action because we have the privilege not to. So it's just the more I learn about these guys, the more I'm just like, we should be deeply skeptical of these people. We should be deeply, deeply, deeply skeptical of these people. Santora, good to see you. Writing of Kamala Harris. She's black. They will still call her the same slur as they would an African American because she's not only black, because she's only not black when it's convenient. Yeah. Nilo writes, Haz's back of the napkin plan to fund the party is for communists to go start businesses and don't quit your job. Be an entrepreneur. Just literally be a capitalist, right? Meanwhile, the Soviets were straight up doing train robbery. Dude, straight up, like, okay, guys, here's how we're going to defeat capitalism. What we're going to do is we're going to go work for capitalists and get jobs with capitalists. Haz calls homeless people landlords. I just think, like, distinctly confused. It's very difficult for me to believe that Haz is, like, in his right mind. And this is the thing about this guy, is, like, don't the people around him see the taint that he brings? Like, don't they see that when this guy is evoking Carl Schmitt and other Nazis, like, don't they see how this brings a taint and how it creates a significant problem for them? Like, I just don't think they actually see the red flags. That's what's crazy. Woke CIA Drone Pilot writes, "Did you see the American Communist Party meme coin? Someone put 110K into launching a crypto scam alongside their new party." I wouldn't be surprised to find out at all that the whole thing is just for that. That the whole thing is just a meme to, like, scam people into buying into a crypto coin. Get your communist coin, right? We're going to build a secondary currency, a parallel currency, right? And it's all just this, like, total scam that they'll all dump on everybody and then bounce. No, my favorite part about it is that when these guys, so the mega communists created a new party. I think they called it the American Communist Party, if I'm not mistaken. And, like, guys like Eddie, Midwestern Mercs, signed off on it. Has signed off on it, right? There's a handful of people, and they said they added to the list a bunch of organizations, a bunch of other communist organizations that had signed on, and about half of those organizations now have pulled out of it, saying, "You never asked us about this. We were never part of this. What are you talking about?" So the whole thing feels very scammy, right? Yeah, parallel structure of PowerCoin. They created a bunch of fake Twitter accounts for the other organizations. Just ridiculous, right? Just unprofessional. Just unprofessional. Like, I'm over here trying to be a professional revolutionary. Right? That's what I want to do. That's what I'm here to achieve, is to be a professional revolutionary. Right? That's who Lenin was. Lenin was a professional revolutionary. Right? And look where it got him. I wish people would stop with the damn crypto too, Joe. No, the crypto thing, like, it's just finding new people to scam, right? There's like 10 billion people in the world. There's always going to be new people, and there's new people being born every day, a sucker born every minute, right? And cryptocurrencies are a perfect scam. Like, they're perfect. They're just a bag holding scheme. Like, it's and Long Defiant writes, I'm getting my first crypto miners this week. I'm projecting 10 times within a year. Yeah, I just, good luck. Yeah, good luck. I just, no thanks. Nilo writes, he's been saying some of his comments in the past were jokes. This is Haz. And personally, but he's being more serious now. I tuned out from him and Hinkle a while ago, but what's going on? I'll listen to see. Yeah, I tuned in to Haz's stream once and immediately thought to myself, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, one of the realizations I've really had, and this is true of like streamers like Destiny, guys like Ben Shapiro, right? What they're doing is babbling, right? That what they'll do is they just talk very fast and they talk like this, right? That's it. That's their whole shtick. They got out of thought training, they just talk like this, and they continue talking, and all they do is say whatever they want to talk about, and they get into a stream of consciousness. You know, I really like Joe Biden, except, you know, he's pretty old, and Joe Biden's pretty old, but, you know, we should expect people to get old, and they get into this stream of consciousness, and what it tells you is they're not actually thinking about what they're saying, right? Because nobody actually talks like this, right? There's nobody out in the world who's like, well, you know, the important thing to understand about Israel is that it has the right to defend itself. You know, these are the and once you understand like where energy originates and how it actually goes through your body, and that energy hits your mouth before it hits your brain, it's pretty clear that these guys are just babbling, and they have a financial incentive to babble. They have a financial incentive to hold the positions that they hold. Like guys like Stephen Bonnell, Destiny, a little boy name. Guys like Stephen Bonnell, right? He's paid by the Democrats, so of course he's going to be a shill for them, right? And like that's all. Woke CIA drone pilot writes, I'm getting my first money printer next week. I'm projecting infinite returns in 0 time. People who talk fast like that are trying to sell you a product. Exactly. Nilo says, they got some lawyers with their new party now, and they say they'll sue for defamation. I think that's what you're saying. Just saying for a heads up. Yeah, because nothing says credible like... hey, free speech. Everybody should be able to say what they want to say. But if you point out that we are sourcing Nazis, right, we'll sue you for defamation. Okay, bud, you're a serious person. I mean, I'm a Canadian, so good luck with that. Okay, this is an article I've had up for a little while. This is from Chris Hedges. Chris Hedges is like one of my spiritual mentors for sure. During the Iraq War, he was one of the very few voices that was actually speaking out against the Iraq War. He paid very deeply for that. He lost his job at the New York Times. I have an immense amount of respect for Chris Hedges. So anytime he publishes basically anything, I want to know what he thinks. Here's my thoughts on Biden dropping out. Joe Biden was discarded by the same billionaire class he assiduously served throughout his political career. barely able to stumble his way through the words on a teleprompter and not always cognizant of what is happening around him, his billionaire supporters pulled the plug. He was their creature. He has been in federal office for 47 years, from start to finish. He was used as a foil to defeat Bernie Sanders in the 2020 primaries and was anointed as the candidate in 2024 in a Soviet-style primary campaign. The billionaire class will now appoint someone else. Democratic Party voters are stage props in this political farce. Donald Trump, unlike Kamala Harris or any other Patrick the billionaire class selects as presidential candidate, has a genuine and committed base, however fascistic. In Hitler and the Germans, the political philosopher Erich Vogelin dismisses the idea that Hitler, gifted in oratory and political opportunism, but poorly educated and vulgar, mesmerized and seduced the German people. The Germans, he writes, supported Hitler and the grotesque marginal figures surrounding him because he embodied the pathologies of a diseased society, one beset by economic collapse and hopelessness. Vogelin defines stupidity as a loss of reality. The loss of reality means a stupid person cannot rightly orient his action in the world in which he lives. The demagogue, who is always an idiot, is not a freak or social mutation. The demagogue expresses the society's zeitgeist. Biden and the Democratic Party are responsible for this zeitgeist. They orchestrated the deindustrialization of the United States, ensuring that 30 million workers lost their jobs in mass layoffs. As I write in America, The Farewell Tour, this assault on the working class created a crisis that forced the ruling elites to devise a new political paradigm. Trumpeted by a compliant media, this paradigm shifted its focus from the common good to race, crime, and law, and order. Biden was at the epicenter of this paradigm shift. Those undergoing profound economic and political change were told that their suffering stemmed not from rampant militarism and corporate greed, but from a threat to national integrity. The old consensus that buttressed New Deal programs in the welfare state was attacked as enabling criminal black youth, welfare queens, and other alleged social parasites. This opened the door to a faux populism, begun by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, which supposedly championed family values, traditional morality, individual autonomy, law and order, the Christian faith, and the return to a mythical past, at least for white Americans. The Democratic Party, especially under Bill Clinton and Biden, became largely indistinguishable from the establishment Republican Party to which it is now allied. The Democratic Party refuses to accept its responsibility for the capture of democratic institutions by a rapacious oligarchy, the grotesque social inequality, the cruelty of predatory corporations, and an unchecked militarism. The Democrats will anoint another amoral politician, probably Harris, to use as a mask for outsized corporate greed, the folly of endless war, the facilitation of genocide, and the assault on our most basic civil liberties. The Democrats, tools of Wall Street, gave us Trump and the 74 million people who voted for him in 2020. They look set to give us Trump again. God help us. Concise. What a writer, man. What a writer. Just absolutely manages to articulate these feelings and these ideas as crisply as anybody can. Just absolutely incredible. The Captain over on Twitch, good Lord, please help us. The fact Mike Johnson opened the dialogue with Netanyahu today and sat behind him, hawks are out, guns blazing. Yes, I haven't had the opportunity to take a look at the Netanyahu speech or the conversation or any of that. I mean, it's just genocidal maniacs upon genocidal maniacs, right? Ben, good to see you. I tune into you for the first time in weeks looking for your perspective on Biden dropping out, and I get it right away. Yeah. Something strange about a communist ending his article with God help us. Well, Ben, contrary to popular opinion or popular belief, I am a theist. I understand that we are in the body of God, and I can talk about it if you like. It's a subject that I like to talk about. I don't buy into the idea that magic is real, but I understand what the concept of God is, and I understand that we exist within that concept. And so that makes me a theist. I think that the way that we have been discussing theism and the concept of God for the last, for the neoliberal period, if not longer than that, is childish. I think that people who call themselves atheists, when I listen to them talk about the concept of God, I don't know what they're talking about. Sounds like a parody. And I've said it several times, and I'll continue saying it, that if your understanding of the concept of God is a parody, then it's easy to reject it. There is a reason why the concept of God has been pushed out of the conversation, and it's because the concept of God is a collectivist idea. That the concept of God binds us together as a single unit. To be a theist in the truest sense is to push out of your nationalist idea and your racial idea to not even identify as a human being, to not even identify as a citizen of Earth, but to identify as something much broader, much grander, that is completely inclusionary. So this idea needs to be destroyed, because I think it is actually an extremely dangerous idea to the capitalist class. That if the society actually believed in the concept of God in a way that made sense, and I think it does make sense, I think that would basically be the end of capitalism. That no one would accept capitalist rule. No one would accept that the capitalists have the right to private property, to own the means of production, to have this dominant position in the social structure. It's absurd on the face of it. It's absurd on the face of it. And so to maintain the system of capital, the concept of God has to be destroyed. And has been destroyed fairly thoroughly. And there's reasons for it. Right? When you assassinate left-wing Christian leaders, it has a profound effect. And when you promote far-right individualist capitalist fanaticism, like the prosperity gospel, it has an effect. And I always... to answer this question quick, Chris Hedges is not a communist. That is correct. I think he identifies as a socialist. Honestly, I have heard Chris Hedges say of himself that when he goes to speak to economists, they call him a Keynesian, a New Deal style Democrat. I don't think that in terms of organization or any of that kind of stuff, in terms of the solutions to the problem, that Hedges is particularly radical. I think he takes the moral position, right? That I think his position would be, if everybody was acting morally and with compassion and following, just even the most basic precepts of Christ, or any of these religious figures, then the system of capital wouldn't be so devastating. I think that fails to point out that the system of capital, as a system, promotes sociopaths and psychopaths. It's a structural issue. Long Defiance says, I've always considered Chris Hedges a liberal's liberal. Maybe that's too harsh. I mean, he wrote a book called The Death of the Liberal Class. And look, to me, the long and short of it is that the proof is in the pudding with this guy, right? Like, you can try to label him with whatever ism you want to, and history will, and that's fine, because that's how it goes. But the truth is that this is a guy who went to the front line to report on war, who saw war firsthand, who fought to get us an accurate view as best as he could of what we were doing overseas, who spent decades of his life in that pursuit, sacrificed a lot of himself to do it, and then came home, and once he saw his country launching an illegitimate war, he refused to be a stenographer for power and stood against the Iraq War and reported on it and was fired for it and lost professional status for it. And that's his story. So there does come a point where, like, we can try to sort of peg Chris Hedges where he stands, but at the end of the day, I've always viewed him as just kind of his own man. That he's not a communist, but he's not a capitalist. I just think that he would like peace. Like, that's really it. That I think that if there was like a New Deal kind of moment happening, right? I think that he would be standing there saying, okay, cool, this New Deal moment is happening. Let's embrace it. Let's build it. Let's build this country, right? He doesn't have the same, or at least he doesn't embrace the same kind of structural critique, right? He's definitely read Marx. He's definitely read these things, but he hasn't really embraced, like, he says himself that he comes from a Calvinist tradition, and so he does adopt to a certain degree the concept of human nature, that there's something inherent within humans, and there is such a thing as a human nature. Whereas Marxists usually take the position that human nature is defined by environmental factors primarily, and that if your environmental factors are structured to encourage a certain type of behavior, then that's the behavior you're going to get, by and large. And when you analyze the structures of capitalism, you see that it encourages psychopathy, right? And the goal for communists is to... the goal of communists is to create structures and institutions that create a certain type of behavior that actually builds society as opposed to tearing it down. Yeah, but people always bicker over who's the true God. Well, look, you're not going to find the quote-unquote true God in a book, right? Like, every religion right now is fundamentalist at the moment, and there's reason for that. We've created a globalized world where everyone has access to everybody else's literature. Everybody is criticizing each other's literature as openly as possible while simultaneously waging war on one another. And so under those conditions, everybody becomes a fundamentalist because they don't want to give up. They don't want to be told that their book is inferior or weak or somehow should be rejected or turned away. So nobody wants to give up any ground. But the truth is that each one of these books and each one of these traditions come up in their own terms and from their own circumstances, and carry a historical truth and a power to them in their own right. But all of them are books written by men about a subject. That's all they are. They are not the subject themselves. So you can read the Vedas, you can read the Quran, you can read the Bible, and each one of these things has its own perspective and its own idea about the concept of God and the concept of the oneness of creation and the wholeness by which we are experiencing it. But there is no universe or reality that exists where, a group of Jews in the Roman Empire nailed it. There's just no reality that like a bunch of merchants in the Middle East nailed it. They got it, 100%. Yeah, it's a bunch of monks in Southeast Asia sitting around talking about it. They nailed it. They got it. That 100%. I just don't think it's a serious position to hold. And in my view, the fundamentalist is the weakest thinker, because the fundamentalist is fundamentally saying, I reject certain types of knowledge, right? That the only knowledge I'm willing to accept is the knowledge that comes from this specific spot and this specific group that I happen to be born in. And so all of the bickering about the true God or any of this kind of stuff comes from this fundamentalist position. And what I have grown into as a theist is a strong desire to cut through that fundamentalism, to cut through it in order to find the real nugget of truth, to see what it was that these thinkers and these writers and these poets and these artists and these scholars, what was it, and these revolutionaries, what was it that they were reaching for? What was it that they were striving to grab hold of? Because it's pretty unlikely that they got a hold of it. Right? It's pretty unlikely that they got a hold of it. And the best I've ever managed to do in terms of my articulation of it is that each of us and all life forms that exist are all part of a singular energy. That we're a single organism, and that single organism is on the quest of its own self-discovery and manifestation. That the drive that each and every one of us has for self-discovery and manifestation of who our true selves is the goal of the single entity that we are all part of. That we are akin to a single cell within a body, right? That you exist, and I exist, and everything exists, little Milo exists, as a single cell that makes up the larger body. And that we are all here collectively, having a collective experience together in the long goal, and I'm talking billions of years long goal, of the organism that we are all part of realizing its true self and finding that question of, who am I? Why am I here? What am I capable of? What is existence? What is all of these things, these feelings and these emotions? And that's what I think is more or less happening. And it's all happening all at once. And we are basically, instead of focusing on that issue, the issue of why are we here, what is the point of any of this, what is the goal, what are we reaching towards, what's the purpose of my life, what should I do with my time, why am I alive, what is existence, what is any of this? Instead of grappling with those very serious issues and grappling with the mystery of it all, grappling with the mystery of all is but instead of doing that, instead of grappling with the mystery, we're all just scrabbling around trying to find a place to live. Maybe go out to the the lake every so often. And Nilo writes, but how do you know you are justified in believing in this God, John? I think things changed for me once I changed the question that atheists had been asking for a while, right? The question, does God exist, is a worthless question. It allows you to define God however you would like, and then accept it and reject it on whatever terms you would like. And so anytime the question gets asked, the first thing that anybody needs to do is clarify what you mean by God, right? And that can take forever. And that's the reason why the whole conversation has been bogged down for so long. Because it's a tough thing to grab a hold of. And so once I changed the question of does God exist to is the universe alive? Or is reality alive, if you prefer? Is this a living organism or is it a dead organism? Once I started asking that question, and once I started perceiving the conversation from that perspective, it became immediately obvious and immediately apparent to me that, yeah, of course this is a living system. Like, of course it's a living system. Of course it's alive. Right? And it's alive separate from me being alive. That I'm not responsible for its creation. I'm not responsible for it being alive. If anything, it's 100% responsible for my existence and me being alive. I didn't spawn it spawned me. So Nilo continues, what do you see as proof of life? Right, so evidence. Where's your evidence? An intelligent question to ask. Well, this is how I think about this. What do I see as proof of life? I mean, you consider yourself alive, right? You consider the tree alive. The grass is alive, right? Like, I'm alive. The cells within me are alive, right? That the more we learn, the more we see that we are life built upon life. That I am not just one thing, I am many things, built to combine and be collected into this single organism that is Jonathan, right? I'm not just one thing, I'm many things that can create a balance and a singular purpose. And if I am to say that I am of the universe, and that the universe is me and within me, and that I am the universe and the universe is me, and I can't separate myself from creation. There is no secondary system. There is no secondary anything. That it is all just one thing. That I don't exist outside of it. I am within it. And part of it. And if I am alive, then the universe is as alive as I am alive. And it must be, definitionally, by a tautology. All of these things are known to be alive because they are known to die. God and the universe are two things where the question of whether it can die is an open question. Sure. I don't think that changes my perspective. And if the universe is God, but nothing can create itself, how did God create itself? Yeah, now you're getting into the moment of creation, right? Like, one of the big questions is, why is there something rather than nothing? Like, what is any of this? Why are we here? It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense. Based on any of the laws of science that we know of, why is there something rather than nothing? Right? And my how I have come to think of this issue, of this, is if you imagine, here, I'll just say it like this. Anytime anything comes into a conscious awareness of itself, i.e. it is birthed, it is created into the world, it steps from the womb into reality. Anytime that happens, the very first thing that being, that life form attempts to pursue is the intuition and the creation, the creative impulse, the question, if you like, what am I capable of doing? Larger questions like who am I, what am I doing here, what is any of this, come much later. Humans are especially, like, we come out fairly half-baked. It takes us a long time to even stand up. But you can see it very plainly with insects, deer, any life form. When it comes out, the very first thing that it does is it pursues, what am I capable of? A horse will jump up on its legs and find its feet and look around and see what all the other horses are doing and do what the horses are doing. Bees do the same thing. They test their wings. They take a look around. Right? They pick it up pretty quickly. Humans take a long time to pick it up because we come out pretty bad. I think that is a universal law. That every life form, when it comes into a conscious awareness of itself, when it comes into its individuality, when it comes into itself, the first thing it pursues, instinctively and naturally built into the very fabric of existence, is what am I capable of doing? Well, I think that this happened with the singular energy that we call God. That this singular energy went from being in a state that is unperceivable to us. We cannot understand it, right? Because it is nothing. We as human beings who are something simply cannot understand the concept of nothing. We never will. Humanity will never understand the concept of nothing. Maybe we can come up to the barrier, but we will never cross that threshold because we are something and we can't be nothing. So this force shifts from nothing to something. And in that moment, in that shift of nothing to something, it pursues what I consider to be the prime instinct of all creation. What am I capable of achieving? What am I capable of doing? And if you are the primary force of creation, if you are the force of all creation, you are the driving, underpinning force of everything, well then you are capable of creating everything that's logically possible to be created. And you do so. And you do so without thought. You do so without judgment. Like, this creative force didn't think to itself, I know what I'll do. I'll make a little blue planet that has this and a bunch of monkeys will come out. And nope. We were created because it's possible that we were created. And we exist within infinity. Another concept that we can't really grab a hold of. Right? We don't really understand infinity. You can actually see how difficult it is for even advanced people, even advanced minds, to grapple with the concept of infinity. When you watch a show like Rick and Morty, right? And in Rick and Morty, the whole premise of Rick and Morty is it's interdimensional travel, right? And so there's infinite universes. But within the lore and the framework of the show, Rick continuously says, there's not that many universes we can step into and like replace ourselves or do something like this. There's a limited amount of that. And I just go, bullshit. That shows you how little you've grabbed on to the concept of the infinite. That directly beside this universe is a universe that is identical to this universe in every single possible way that you can imagine, except in this moment, I say a different number other than 11. and then the universe continues forward. And those two divergent universes will diverge and then reconnect until finally I say a number. If I had sat here and been like 558,392,000 and just said a big long number, it could have taken up so much time. So to diverge things could have changed something in a more meaningful way, perhaps. And and so that's the concept of the infinite, and it exists because it's logically possible to exist. And I think that, and so this leads me to a path, and theists get mad at me when I say this. I don't think God knows what's going on either. Like, I don't think the force of creation understands what's happening either. I mean, maybe in a big meta way, in like a whole complete, like, from the top of the picture, maybe. But insofar as this moment right now, as we're all traveling and we're experiencing it, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. I think that this force of creation is just as trapped in this as we are. And that the only way that it can find to discover itself and its purpose and its existence and the reason for its existence is by experiencing it. And so, and how is it experiencing it? It's experiencing it right now. It's experiencing it by me talking into this mic to you, and it's experiencing it by you listening to me talk. That I speak to you with the voice of God, and you listen with the ears of God. And then you speak back to me with the voice of God. And we are all, each and every one of us, an aspect of creation. That there is no chosen one. We are all the chosen one. And we are all part of the wider fabric. We are each of us a single thread in the fabric. We are a single tile, a single note in the chorus of creation. And each note and each tile in the mosaic and each thread in the quilt is as important as the one that is beside it. Because without that thread, you can't have a quilt. Without that note, you don't have a chorus. And I think that this concept's very important for people to hold on to. Very important for people to at least contemplate. I genuinely do not care if you sit there, like if you're sitting there thinking this sounds like hooba-jooba nonsense bullshit. Okay. I don't think it's important that you accept it. Right? I'm not a fundamentalist. But I think it's important to contemplate it. I think it's important to think about. I think it's important to think about the people who are around you differently. Not just as NPCs, but as player characters. And that their lives are just as important. Because they are, in fact, a divine creature. Created by a force of creation that we simply do not understand. That we have a very thin, tenuous grasp of. Donald. Donald has returned. Yeah, Ben says, this is exactly what I think of death. It's something incomprehensible. Yeah, I think that's what makes it so scary, right? It is incomprehensible. We cannot grab a hold of it. We will not understand it. That even if there was a moment of clarity, that moment will fade away. And as we return to the whole. And the concept of our individualism, the concept of ourself, will fade away. And we will return back to the singular energy. We'll go back home. That's why I'm not afraid of it. Because I know that that's my home. that I'm not from here. You're not from here. I'm not from Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. That's just the line, right? That's just the spawning point. But I'm from my Creator. I originate from the body of God, just as you do. And when I die and when my time here ends, I will return home. And I think that there is something within all of us where we know this to be true. We all know, intrinsically somehow, that when we die, we go back home. And there's a kind of aching for it, a form of longing for it. I think I see that within like millennial suicide humor and the suicide culture that exists within millennials. That this place isn't so good, I'm just going to pop off. Or let's tell jokes about how let's commit suicide. I remember I went for an evaluation about whether I had ADHD or not. Right? And the guy asked me straight, he was just like, hey, do you have suicidal thoughts? And I just looked back at him and I said, doesn't everybody? And he kind of just went and moved on. Because I think that that's just part of being alive. The French have a term for it, the call to the void. Like, you'll be standing on a street corner, and a car will drive by, and suddenly you'll have this impulse to throw yourself in front of the car. Right? But you don't. But the impulse is there. Well, that's the call to the void. You're homesick. Donald, yes, my name is Jonathan. Donald writes, no matter how much you try to think about how death feels like, ultimately, above all, you'll still be alive, yeah? Because being dead is anti-life, so you can't grasp it. That's exactly right. Nilo writes, I think infinity and nothing are a good way to understand each other. Nothing is a type of infinity, maybe the inversion of infinity. Yeah. Donald writes, you believe in multiverse rebirth conspiracy? I wouldn't describe it as a conspiracy. I mean, it's an idea. A theory, if you like. But the multiverse theory is fairly well established. It's not a fringe thing. I'm still sort of 50-50 on reincarnation as an idea. The thing that kind of stumps me about reincarnation, I think, is I just don't see. And I mean, it's not really my place to understand it, I suppose, but I just don't know what that is. Like, what is it? What is it that would make the force of creation want to recycle an old pattern into a new pattern or into a new idea? And that's a much bigger question than I think I'll ever get a hold of. And I can only come up with fleeting ideas of like, why would the force of creation want to reincarnate a Tibetan monk from 1452 into Brooklyn in 1976? Like, what's... And I guess there's something about, like, one of the core Christian messages is the concept of resurrection. The idea that you can kill the man, but you can't kill the messenger. You can kill the messenger, but you can't kill the message. And that the force of creation does this, that it continuously brings up the old message, and that you can kill this one person, but another will be right behind them. I'm going to go use the washroom, and then I'm going to address this question that Donald is bringing forward. 1 second, guys. I gotta tell you guys, I'm really glad to be talking about this about this subject. It makes me feel better. It helps me. It helps me because I get trapped in my own head just like everybody else, and I get trapped in my own patterns of thought. But having this conversation always reminds me that, like, no, there's a peace at the end of all of this. That there's a singularity to all of this. There's a singularness to all of this. And that this is all just, it's chaotic now, but it won't be forever. So, Donald asks, you think socialism is the freedom from any form of exploitation and all humans should deserve this right? I want to be more specific than this, Donald, which is that so communism is the doctrine of the liberation of the working class. That's what communism is, as defined by Frederick Engels in The Principles of Communism. I think that's the cleanest articulation of what communism is. I'll say it again so that you can hear it again, which is the doctrine of the liberation of the proletariat, the working class. That it's not a dogma, it's not a fundamentalist doctrine. It's a process. It's a toolkit with the goal of liberating the proletariat. And what are we liberating the proletariat from? We're liberating the proletariat from the bourgeois, the capitalist class, the ownership class. Previously kings, now capitalists. You continue. So my question should be, do you think natives, First Nations people, and indigenous in the world should also, like they also deserve freedom and live in their human emancipation from any form of hierarchy within tribes, and should let people work on their way to communism? I mean, and to me, it's up to the people to discuss and decide how they should be governed. And that includes First Nations people, which they were doing that. First Nations people were doing that before we arrived. They were dealing with their own lives. That fundamentally, what communism is about is it says that the people who do the work should own the assets that facilitate that work. They should own the means of production. That if a group of 200 workers work in a factory, they should own that factory. That they should be the primary stakeholders in that factory, and that there simply should not be a capitalist class at all. There should be nothing there standing between the worker and his trade. That, to me, the great sin of capitalism, the great trouble that capitalism brings, is that it is largely broken into two classes, which is the employee and the employer, the proletariat and the bourgeois, the working class and the ownership class. And that this is an antagonist. This is an antagonism. This is an antagonistic relationship. By definition, it is structurally antagonistic. That what's good for the worker is bad for the owner, and what's good for the owner is bad for the worker. And communists seek to rectify this contradiction in order to eliminate this contradiction from the society, so that there is but one class, and that what's good for one member in that class is good for all members within that class, and that there are not these contradictions that exist structurally within the society. And that's the overriding goal of the entire project, which is the doctrine of the liberation of the working class, of the proletariat. Donald continues. So you think it's okay for natives to exist within social structures that benefit some, like leaders and cults of others? Isn't your philosophy as communism human above all, regardless of culture? If you are actually, like, I don't have the right to tell another society or another group of people how to live. Just nakedly, flatly. That if I am analyzing another country, it is to learn from them. That Western chauvinists will look at other societies in order to critique them and condemn them or look down on them. So that's most Westerners, Marxists. But really, communists should be focusing on their own society, on what's going on in their own place, and not really interfering in the affairs of another country, unless some kind of revolutionary moment occurs. So this makes you think communism is... No, communism is for the whole of humanity, but I'm not a fundamentalist. Right? There is no one true God path to communism. There is no one exclusive way to achieve communism. There's no... and a state of communism can't be reached worldwide because it's international movement. I don't really understand the concept. Well, you're stumbling into actually a fairly large question within communism, which, funnily enough, is articulated by the conversations between Stalin and Trotsky. That Trotsky was an internationalist, and Stalin was a nationalist on this question. Can you build socialism in one state? Or does it have to be a worldwide revolution? I think that the Chinese are sort of showing that you can achieve a lot in a single state, but that you have to be very careful, right? That as long as there is an international capitalist system, that will always be a threat. That will always be a threat to any kind of communist system and communist society. And the Soviets are the proof pudding of that. Like, the proof's in the pudding for the Soviets. They got invaded by the Nazis. The Nazis killed 20 million Soviets. The very first concentration camps Adolf Hitler erected were communist concentration camps. Donald writes, the communist nations should align. For example, North Korea. Cuba doesn't have everything they need within borders, system of social. China's a huge trader, relies on others. Yeah, you're describing BRICS. There's an organization, a trade organization that has erected with China as the heart of it, called BRICS. It's a trade alliance between Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa that is gaining a lot of steam. And it is erected specifically to sidestep what the Americans call the international rules-based order. And the international rules-based order is is like the World Health Organization, the UN, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. These organizations were created post World War II in order to erect an international system, but ultimately have resulted in a dividing of the world between what's called the global north and the global south. And the global north, the capitalists that won post-World War II, essentially were exploiting the global south for the longest time. And it's just now starting to be the case that the global south is starting to flip the script. Africa is beginning to decolonize itself, which is a huge problem for Europe and America. the Ukraine war essentially alienated Russia from the global north. Russia was trying to become part of the global north, but is now becoming part of the global south because of the Ukraine war, which I consider to be like an absolutely boneheaded move by the Americans, essentially driving Russia into the hands of the Chinese. It's just a total fucking disaster. Just an absolute disaster for America. Literally, post-World War II, the Americans were fighting huge, enormous wars. The Vietnam War was fought completely to try to drive a wedge between the Soviet Union and Russia and China, rather. And Nixon explicitly stated that his goal was to form an alliance with China to separate China from Russia. And that, because Russia and China being allies is a huge problem for America, right? Well, what have they done? They've driven Putin directly into the hands of the Chinese, and the Chinese and the Russians are creating trade alliances and trade organizations. Putin just visited North Korea. Like, it's an enormous, it's turning into an enormous problem for America, and it's all coming out of, and it's all possible because China is Marxist, and they use Marxist principles and Marxist ideas, right? And of course you can throw shade at China and be like, well, they're not true Marxists or anything, but at least they've read the literature, right? At the very least, like, America is illiterate. They don't know anything about Marxism, right? They don't teach it. Meanwhile, you've got Xi Jinping saying, "Hey, let's keep reading Marxism. Let's go. We need to make sure this is the foundation." So it's no, there's a huge conflict brewing on the global stage right now. It is an absolutely enormous, like, I mean, let's bring up the map. Like, the dividing line, right? So the American empire is essentially like, draw a line with, like, around Belarus here, down the Russian, right? And then draw this line around Ukraine, right? Basically around the Black Sea, right? Some conversation about whether or not does it go this way and is Turkey part of the north or is Turkey part of the south? I think Turkey is deciding. We'll see. But certainly the line goes like this and cuts around this way and then goes right over the North Atlantic and then cuts into the United States. And then, of course, it includes Australia, right? So you have the global north. It's this band like this. And that's allied against the global south, which is this band. And I know it's not a true north-south, but that's the... And there are fronts in the war, right? You have the Mexico-United States border. So it's a major front because it's on the home front, right? You've got concentration camps all along the border. They're building border walls and doing all kinds of stuff. There's huge conflict in Texas against the federal government because of all of this. Another major border is, of course, the Ukraine war. Right, that's a major border war against the global south. And then, of course, Israel is another front, right? That this is the front of a war on the global south. So you have essentially a three-front war that has been going on for a long time. And all of this is beginning to bubble over. And it looks as though the United States and Europe are not going to walk away from it clean. That they are going to walk away from the coming conflict heavily diminished. It's highly likely the United States has an inward collapse. That the states begin to fight amongst themselves, and it bubbles over into a civil war. I think that's actually the most likely outcome. As empires decline, they fall apart in that way. And it's absolutely absurd to believe the United States is going to stay like this. Like, it's just I don't think it's a very serious position to hold. If you take a look at empires that rise and fall, empires fall, and when they fall, they break up. right? So it's highly likely America is going to break up. And I'm not saying this is happening tomorrow, but this is the trajectory. This is what we're on. And I think the same is true of the EU. And I think there's way more historical precedent for an internal fight and an internal war here. Like, the United States has had one civil war. And you could make the argument that, yeah, they had a civil war, it was over the slavery issue. Right? And you know, maybe they'll have another conflict over a similar issue, but really, the history of America has been one of unity. Well, America hasn't been around for that long. Right? America basically gets formed up by a bunch of mutineers to the British Crown who essentially say, yeah, we don't want to be ruled by a king. So we're going to have a revolution. These guys were like 20 when that happened, by the way. Like, one of the things I think is so funny is that when we think about the Founding Fathers, we think of them as like old men. Right? All of the portraits and all of the imagery we look at was them old men. When they had that fucking revolution, they were all in their 20s. They were all in their fucking 20s. They were probably your age. Right? When they were writing these documents and these constitutions. Like, the American Constitution was written by a guy who today would be playing Fortnite. Like, and then we stand and say that these are sacred documents written by Jesus Christ himself. Just a bunch of kids, basically. And, yeah, the United States isn't even a country. It's a federation of states, hence United States. But, look, eventually they're just going to look at the federal government and they're just going to think, this is too cumbersome. Why are we tolerating this? Why are we putting up with this federal government? Right? And like everything about the system is outdated. Doesn't really make sense anymore. And so it's highly likely that it's just going to have an internal struggle. And so while it has this internal struggle, and incidentally, like, the history of Europe is not one of peace and joy, right? Like, the period of post-World War II to the modern era is the longest period of time of peace that has ever happened in Europe, like, in its entire history. That these countries fight all the time, constantly. Their entire history is one of warfare. I don't think they know how to be at peace with one another. I don't think they like it. I think they want to be antagonistic to one another. And I think that this Ukraine conflict is really putting some fissures in this whole NATO alliance. And should NATO fall apart, war is going to follow. I think it's highly likely that there will be a war that happens in Europe. There'll be internal wars. And and in the meantime, China's just going to keep plugging along. Just going to keep plugging along. Not causing anybody any trouble. Just building itself up. Just building up its resource base, building up its manufacturing base, building up its productive capacity. Right? It's just going to steadily keep doing that. That isn't to say I don't think there'll be conflict in the region. I think Taiwan is a obvious flashpoint. North and South Korea is an obvious flashpoint. I think that in a couple generations, the North will just walk down to the South and take it over, because the South just won't have the population base anymore. South Korea is basically going extinct. It's just destroying itself. So, and I mean, it's destroying itself along capitalist lines, right? South Korea is destroying itself the same way that all the capitalist nations are destroying themselves, which is the birth rate has sharply declined. Right? The birth rate in Canada right now, so the replacement birth rate, right? The replacement birth rate is 2.1. You need to have that 0.1 because, shit happens. But that's replacement. Every woman in your society, to maintain a stable population base, needs to have 2.1 children. Well, in Canada, it's at 1.3 right now. In South Korea, it's at 0.3. So for every 100 people, the next generation, there'll be 3. Is that right? Did I do that math correctly? No, there'll be 30. So for every 100 people, there'll be 30. And then that group of people, should the birth rate remain at 0.3, right? Well, now they'll only have something like 3. That's collapse in 25 years. North Korea is looking at South Korea right now. Because the North Korean birth rate, it's difficult to get good numbers out of North Korea, but the numbers seem to be like 1.3, so about the same as Canada. 1.3, 1.4, right? So North Korea is experiencing a bit of a decline. South Korea is experiencing a total collapse. Well, no workers to replace anyone, no soldiers to shoot guns. And North Korea is still a highly militant society. There was never a formal peace deal that was signed between North and South Korea. And so North Korea is literally just going to walk into South Korea. Right? They're just going to walk down there and be like, okay, we're here. And South Korea will be like, the one guy that's left will be like, meh. Well, and like a reunification of North and South Korea is inevitable, right? Like this configuration of North and South Korea like this is unnatural. There isn't really precedent for it in the history of Korea. I'm sure that there was a period of time where something similar happened, but this is not its natural normal state. Right? Like, Korea is this. Like, Korea's like this. And the reason why Korea is its own thing is because there's a mountain range here. Right? So Korea has always been kind of its separate... Which isn't to say that it hasn't... Like, China has definitely taken Korea in periods of time. It's the reason why the Americans destroyed Korea. Is because they were worried the Chinese were going to take Korea. So they thought to themselves, well, we'll just destroy it. We'll split it up in two. We'll make it so that the Chinese can't even get in there. We'll create so much disorder that they won't be able to do anything about it. Same story with Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia. We'll just destroy it. Right? Like, it's the reason why they keep talking about the Free Tibet movement. They didn't like that China walked over to Tibet and freed the people of Tibet. They didn't like that. They don't like that China has Xinjiang. They don't like that. They want China to be smaller. They want this territory to be quote unquote independent, so that America can get its independent contractors in there, right? Enslave the local population, right? You want to see some real forced labor in Xinjiang? Let the Americans in. That's when you'll see some real forced labor. Yeah, after all the money the empire has poured into South Korea, well, the theory is that we're going to turn Japan and South Korea into outposts, and we'll show these communists, we'll show them the splendor and the glory of the capitalist system, right? They won't be able to deny it. And to a certain degree, that's been effective. China has definitely adopted a very, shock and awe sort of perspective. You can see it in a lot of their cities. Like, some of their cities are just lit up. Just straight up an entire building that's just, like, blazing with light. There's just no reason to do that outside of, like, this kind of shock and awe of capital. Look at the glory of our country. Look at the glory of this kind of thing, right? There's no humility. Oh yeah, it would be sweet justice to see North Korea take South Korea. I mean, I just think it's an inevitability. You take a look at the politics of South Korea, you take a look at the demographics of South Korea, you take a look at, like, if North Korea walks down to South Korea and basically says, hey, you know how you're working 60-hour work weeks? We're going to turn that into a 30-hour work week. I think that's the end of that war, right? That's the end of that. Like, there's all kinds of moments in the history of warfare where, like, 1,000 years ago, right? You've got, like, France and Belgium having a fight, right? France and Germany, right? And this like little border here, this section of the border, there's like a little, there's like a park here, and there's people living in the park. And the Germans come into the park, and they take this little section, and they say, this park now belongs to Germany. And the people living in the park go, okay, what does that mean? And the guy who's informing them that this land now belongs to Germany, he looks at his piece of paper, and he says, it means that you need to pay the German crown 2% of your annual crops. And then the guys look at each other and they go, we're paying 5% to the king of France right now, so sweet deal. And then they just go on and live their lives completely normal, except they think they got a good deal because the new king cut our taxes 3%. Fuck yeah. Right? Well, guys, I'm gonna end this one a little bit early. I am a sleepy bunny. I'm gonna go to bed. Hopefully not sweat in the heat. Always remember, each and every one of you is a quantum being, walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes you'll never realize it. You'll just stay the good little commodity they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.